leaving the meet. There we go, in about 15 minutes early. So go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, just as I was saying, Blair and I had spoken about this a bit, and I wasn't necessarily 100% confident on the presentation of this for right now, but this was the first iteration that's been validated. Most people have kind of approved it. There hasn't been much pushback on this. My concern is whenever you switch to the other tab, there's going to be an empty state. How much content should be filled in that empty state? For example, if I start adding like a search bar or like additional roles, that might shuffle this content down. And a concern being that if organizations have, tens or hundreds of custom roles, this could get rather unwieldy, and this feels like not a good use of the space. This table or this content could presumably change based off of whatever you have selected here. So this would be the permissions table that has been defined for documentation. And based on whatever selection you have, that can change. So that way a user or an admin can see what permissions have been set for that. I had this idea of maybe making it 2 columns to try and minimize the difference in space or give more space when needed. But it might truncate here as well horizontally. This has not been validated. It's just another idea I had, just let's try something different just to talk about it. But yeah, so I was curious if there was some feedback on that, specifically on like I guess this is the officially validated screen, this one and this one.
So next, we have roles and permissions together on this page, and I think you said that very quickly why you feel like we need to have both of those on the same page. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I'll go to the actual flow here, or not the flow, but the other prototype. The idea is that this would be a template or a way to see what's being built as you create new roles, so you can create a custom role. So our 5 default ones are like owner, maintainer, developer, reporter, and guest. And if you go to create a new one, then the permissions table would allow you to see which was the template persona or role that you've chosen to add or subtract a new custom role off of that. So we're keeping this container here available as kind of like the builder component for this. And so this part needs to kind of stay there, or at least this functionality needs to exist in some capacity to allow the admin to see the permissions that they have access to based off of the default role that they've chosen, and then the changes that they'll be making to the new role that they're creating. So any sort of customization, either it's additive or subtractive permission. So that's kind of where the idea of this container came from. So this is actually like the secondary screen. This would be the screen before it, where you have your list of custom roles. And if you were to click the new role, it would take you over to this builder.
So I guess that's what, for me, is what kind of popped out, is that we're on the other page. The view of it is that we're combining kind of a left side navigation that has things. Then one of these navigational items has 2 things, roles and permissions. And then we have tabs and then vertical stacking. It feels like a lot of organizational things thrown together.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't have a suggestion there. I'm just that felt a little.
Yeah, that I would agree. Like, I'm not really sure if this is the best way to implement this. Like I said, we did show this to clients and users, and they did appreciate it. They did understand the interaction, but I do think there is room for improvement or make it more user friendly or more easy to use. And that's kind of where I'm trying to see if there's another solution or something that I haven't thought of to execute this kind of flow where you have this idea of a builder of a custom role with customized permissions. You can choose like a template or one of our 5 default roles to base that off of. So you want to have like a compare and contrast to see what is and is not. And then you want to go back to your inventory of the roles that you've created, and then have knowledge of that particular role to see what was changed. So instead of just having the list with no way to inventory or know what was turned off and on, you can see that here. Also, there'd be like an auditing function for this, obviously.
So is there interaction between the top and the bottom? So if I were like,
Yeah, so the idea is
select
that
a role,
if I were to go, if I was to go back to the more like polished version, the idea here is that if I were to select one of these roles, this content would change, and that behavior would work for both of these tables, table containers or tabs, because you'd have to know if you were to create a custom role and call it like maintainer for this project only, it would have some sort of variation difference between the maintainer that's our current default and the customized role that you made. So you'd want to go to this container here to see what were those changes, because that we have no current way to manifest that change to a user.
okay. So I don't know that I feel like I had to ask that question of how these two sections are going to interplay together. I see where you're driving at. I just don't know that like that's necessarily obvious. Maybe play with that idea of selecting and displaying. It feels like that's the right solution. I'm also struggling to think of another situation in GitLab where we have kind of two sections where one affects the other one.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was concerned about also, is that really easily understood? And one of the things I thought about earlier was this idea of a button that says new role group, that would add like categorization to this. Because again, the problem is if an organization makes tens or hundreds of custom roles, we don't really have a categorization system for this. So I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I don't even need the tabs, because then I would have the default roles as one category or one group. And then any sort of custom would live outside of that group. So then I could get rid of this tab behavior, and then allow an organization to have the default ones that are there, and then build off of that without sort of any interaction or damaging or changing the default ones. And then they could make their own categorization. The interaction component still leaves something to be desired, but that was something else that I was thinking to try and help minimize these amounts of touch points.
Is there like research or insight that you have that kind of leads you to think that once somebody starts customizing roles, that the default, like knowing that something is a default, is important to them, or like a system reason why like that distinction between like defaults and non-defaults is important?
Do you mean in the idea that where they're building a custom role, or just after the fact in general?
No, more after the fact. Like, you know, when you're looking at this list as a user, and in that scenario that you've described where they've built, you know, a significant subset of customized roles, like, do I as the admin care that something's the default, or like why is that distinction important to me?
Generally, the idea would be that they would be able to troubleshoot. So if for any reason that they had a permission or a role that they had created that was a custom role, and it was not having access to features or not responding the way that they'd want it to, they'd want to see what features were turned on or off, and is there a clean or pristine state that they can revert to, so they can go back. And so having that knowledge is like, okay, well, I know that I can go back to the developer role as a default, and then look at that and see where the difference, maybe that would be the way of doing it. So mostly it's like a troubleshooting way of interacting with it. And then another point would be for documentation, which is kind of not necessarily related to this, but we were talking about this would generate, excuse me, this table would be code level, obviously, but it would then populate the documentation. So instead of having to make 2 changes in 2 places, any change that was done at the code level would actually populate in the documentation also. So that's kind of where we want to have the consistency aspect of it from our historical, our default 5 permission roles, and a way to visualize those or interact with those and see that. Does that answer the question somewhat?
Yeah, I think so. I think I was just trying to figure, like, having 2 tabs seems to give it a lot of prominence. I think having like if you were to group them, that feels a little bit more streamlined. And then maybe like even a level further could be, even just like a label or something. Like, so, if you have custom roles, like you could just apply like a label to the 5 defaults that says, owner like default or something. Like, if, basically, if you find yourself in the scenario where like there's a lot of these like nested sort of UI components, like that could be a way out of one layer of organization. But the group approach could be another way to solve that, I think. That feels a little bit less sort of heavy than the tabular approach, since it doesn't seem like that's like something that they're going to regularly be looking at to see, like, I need to look at defaults versus custom. It's more like a narrow use case.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense now that you described it in that way. I think the only time they'll really interact with it is for looking at documentation or looking at it for documentation. And then the building interaction component where it's like, I need to know which template to build off of. And then I select that, and that's what I would interact with it. And apart from that, it would kind of be irrelevant. So I think the idea of having like a label of like GitLab default would be really a simple solution to get rid of these tabs.
How do I edit these? Or can you edit not necessarily the default ones, but like if there's a custom role in this list, how can I?
Yeah, so I haven't done the visual for that just yet. My initial idea would be it would just go back to the builder screen, so you can go and toggle things on and off. I'm wondering though if there is like a concern for editing rather than just deleting and starting over, in terms of like to maintain security or safety. So that's something to definitely investigate on my end.
Okay, I'm thinking part like with the patterns, like if you're clicking and it's opening sort of a preview pattern almost, like here you have kind of a vertical stack master detail pattern, and I think your other approach was basically the horizontal approach. I guess you could just have like an edit button or something from that sort of preview panel, or does the preview panel itself become the edit state?
So no, that was the other thing that I was mentioning is so this would be, for example, the inventory page, and there could be like an edit button or delete button. But if you were to do that, it would go back to the creation screen, which looks like this.
Yeah, okay.
So it would have the new label for the role, or the role, the label that exists, the template that it was based off of, and then the permissions table, which has the permissions that need to be toggled on and off. So it would just revert back to this. The idea is that this table is kind of the main interaction point, and that's kind of why we want to keep it in both screens, for documentation, but also because it's part of this builder screen.
Got it. Okay.
Thanks for sharing this, Danielle. I've got a couple of questions in the doc, but they're quite quick. When you said there are two like logical sections, were you referring to the 2 bits in the tabs, or like the top section of roles and the bottom section of permissions?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So the idea of roles as the one object that I'll be interacting with. So I have my inventory of roles or custom roles that I've made, and then the content of the permissions that are associated to those roles.
I think I missed this, but you might have said it at the start. What do people use this page to see or do?
This page doesn't exist yet, but what they would do is that they would come here to create a new custom role with custom permissions.
And this, like, custom roles is something that's new, is it?
Yeah.
So new, something that I find quite hard with tabs is where the content starts and ends.
Yeah.
I think you might have said it earlier, but does the tabs change what happens underneath as well?
Yeah. Yeah. So here it would just be the 5 default, which would never really change. But if you were to switch to tab, you would have an empty state. And then you would also have, once you have a populated list, a search bar and an untold number of items within this list. And that presents a problem of, do I set it to only 5 and then do pagination here in the middle of the page, which seems weird? Do I leave it infinite scroll and get rid of this whole table? And that's where the idea of like, okay, well, maybe this double column might actually help, because then I can keep the content separate, and that way I can infinite scroll on both. And so that's kind of where I'm thinking, like, I'm not sure this is the correct solution. That's kind of where I'm thinking, like, is there a better way of doing this? Because even if I do get rid of the tab behavior and just categorize things by groups or labels, what's the limit? What happens when I hit like a theoretical change or a threshold where I don't want this to continue to be pushing the content down, but I also feel weird paginating in the middle of a page? And I don't know if there's any other examples of that elsewhere in the environment.
Thanks. Yeah, it wasn't clear to me that permissions and below is actually outside of the tab group. So maybe something, there's a way of making clearer where the end of the tab sections is. I guess something that's similar to that is a new role always a custom role? And if it is, should it be within the custom role, like within the custom role section somehow? At the minute, it's outside of it.
Yeah. So every new role will always be a custom, because we will not allow any changes to the default as a means of troubleshooting. So that's kind of where I'm thinking, like, is this really necessary if it's just going to be always ending up over here in this section, in the custom section? Maybe the label system is the better solution there, since we already have that implemented, and it would reduce the content being taken up on the page.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Gonna jump in here, and this is not solutioning. Don't just think of it, this is just a possible option, but the way that I'm thinking of our default roles is they're permanent, they're not changing, they're constants. And so they're, in my mind, maybe they don't need to take up like a whole section of the page, and you divide it custom versus default by tabs. If I recall correctly, the reason that we display those roles is one, as sort of a template for them to create custom roles, or two, to sort of reset, like go back. I've done too much on this custom role, I just want to go back and start. If that's the case, then maybe our default roles, we can put in either a drop down or as radio buttons or as something small but permanent that they can apply, instead of taking up all of that section of the top half of the screen. Like maybe don't go this route, but like drop down, and admin is one of them, and you select admin and there's a button that says apply these permissions or something like that. Something where we, like, again, because they don't change, it's a permanent list, something that we can sort of hide away or reduce in actual screen size, because really the focus here is the custom roles. And the default roles are really only used to either start from or go back to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's also something to help, because if the default roles are immutable, then there's no point in having them here apart from just clicking on it and looking at the permissions that are defined here in this table, which would functionally serve as documentation. But do we want to take up a whole page in the platform for documentation? So I think that kind of makes sense to just not even have them, or at least the default ones, and you only have the custom roles here. And if they wanted to go look at them, they could look at them elsewhere. But the default would still occur in the dropdown in the builder, where they would be seeing them side by side, which one would be toggled on and off compared based off of the template role that you've chosen of those 5. So that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and you could even keep that bottom section, because they changed depending on which default role you select as sort of an educator of what those things are. But you could, I don't know, this is not the way to go, but have the default roles as being radio buttons with labels horizontally across the screen, so it's not taking up all of that space. And it's also sort of a way for the user to actually explore what all the roles are and what they do, how they change, something like that.
That's interesting. Okay, I like that idea too.
If you want to see vertically stacked sections that have more, the branches page is an example of that. And in my opinion, it's an example of why vertically stacking things that might need to scroll is probably not going to be an optimal solution, because you just get caught where you're going to have to truncate something, and then the vertical stacking becomes foolish, because you're going to need some way to navigate to the rest of them, and it kind of blows the whole design. So I feel like vertical stacking is gonna lead you down to a trap.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. And I think in both these cases, like this, and then also this 2-column, I see big holes to jump into very easily. Alexis, did you want to ask your question? You said it answered elsewhere, but
yeah, I think it was answered elsewhere, but
Okay.
I'll keep looking at the issue as well.
sure. Dan.
Yeah. So what shows in the permission section of the let me just check I've understood the interaction first, though. If you're viewing a role, you interact with something in the top, and then you can view the things at the bottom.
Right. So
is that right?
Anything you were to click here would change the content here.
Sure.
Because it would be based off of, you'd want to see what permissions were assigned to that role. Because the only other way of doing it that I'm thinking now would have to go and edit, which feels dangerous if you misclick and do something. If you just want to look at it real quick, clicking on it here, and you'd be able to see it within this table.
So what's at the bottom if you've got nothing selected at the top?
It would just be, well, that's probably, it'd have to be one of the defaults is what our initial intention was, just the entire permission table.
Because the answer to that question might help you answer your empty state question, because if it's an empty state, there's nothing selected.
Yeah, I think the initial idea might have been just the entire permissions table for all 5 default roles. That's kind of what we were basing it off of, but that might feel clumsy. So I might have to visualize that to see how horrible it looks. Because an empty state feels also weird. But I mean, both of these like points kind of manifest the problem that I have with this kind of presentation in general. Like maybe this isn't the correct solution.
Yeah, an empty state certainly great way to encourage someone to create their first new role, new custom role.
Mm-hmm. I hate these.
Outside of, I guess the boards view kind of does this, but are there other places in the tool that are using like a list view combined with a drawer pattern for like a master detail pattern? Because that would that would be sort of, it's similar to your horizontal approach. And like the boards view kind of does it. It's like the small drawer, but are there other places that are using a similar pattern?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know of any places using this kind of interaction. And that's kind of the thing that I'm like, this doesn't feel right.
I think maybe like the drawer though, that slides out from the side. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like a side, the right-hand drawer, I think that was kind of like our first idea. But the problem that I had there was that because this is such a documentation heavy or a text heavy object, I felt you might have gotten stuck by having weird long chunks of content, and the sidebar would just scroll and scroll and scroll. It could be better done by reducing the text and leading it off to documentation and just having like, you know, small blurbs like you have here, right? But yeah, that's something that I definitely wanted to explore, having the idea of the sidebar or the side nav pop out and help. I think the aversion to that was that because we're using this as kind of like the builder screen also, that we could minimize the amount of different components being used. But again, like I said, I'm not sure if that's a valid excuse or a reason to stay within this form.
I was kind of thinking similarly. I think that it sounds like that was, you want to reduce scrolling. Could it be, I guess, either like a modal if you had to do that, or can it be an accordion, which then brings in a lot of scrolling? Like I click into the role and it takes me to another view. Or like, what if we had the drawer, but it had like a secondary drawer within the drawer? Like I clicked in permissions and it just, the drawer becomes all about permissions and I can go back or something like that. Introduces more, but
like individual drawers, like so like for individual one for like namespace or repository, like this was supposed to be an accordion anyways. But I do see having the sidebar as being, you know, every container has its own sidebar. The issue there, let me see if I can find it real quick. Is that the table might be really long. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. So this is what we were trying to look at as our model to build off of. And so this is just the entire permissions just for projects. So this, or the other one was for groups. This is for projects, jobs permissions, and it just goes on and on and on. And so these, we actually had to spend time and go and categorize all of this stuff and put them in these containers. And that's where the those 5 topics were in the prototype, like namespace, repository, product management, because this table is just too much, right? But that's what the end game is supposed to be, is that every one of these little checkboxes should be toggleable to allow an admin to add or remove that permission from the role that they're building off of these.
that kind of makes me think it should be its own view because it's like a form, right? If you're clicking on the thing at the top as almost like a button to change the information at the bottom, then you're going to the bottom. Like if you're editing that, is there that kind of save CTA somewhere within the permissions form? Like how do I save if I edit my permissions?
that would be in the other screen. I'll go back and share that real quick. But yeah, that's the should it be a sticky save button at the top or the bottom or something? I haven't really manifested that one either.
I'm like, I think Dan's gonna hit on it too. I'm wondering if MVC, it could just be like a modal, even if it's kind of ugly. Do you want to talk about that while other Dan is bringing this up? Daniel and Dan.
So I'm really confused which Dan or Daniel we're expecting to speak right now.
You were talking about the modal underneath my point, so I was saying if you wanted to bring that up while he was bringing this up.
Yeah, when we were talking about it, then I was thinking, I wonder how we do it in value stream management, where it's this weird, you got to make a custom thing, and sometimes you want to edit it, sometimes you want to review it to debug it. So I went to see what we do, and it's all through the magic of the modals for creating it, and for to review it, you've got to edit it, but
You have
that's how
can
we
you share
did
your
it.
screen? Are you seeing it or?
Yeah, sure. Let's try. Let me just check and see if I can do it in a way that we can keep this on YouTube public, because the group level isn't public for value stream. Please hold. No.
It's okay.
Can't.
We can look at it afterwards. We want to put a link in the agenda.
Yeah. So I'll pop the link there and push the edit button, or use the drop down to on the right. We know it's in a bad place. We're moving it soon.
Okay.
No one can find it. Next to category API. And you make a new one in that drop down there.
I don't think I have permission to do that. I don't see anything in interactive. Well, we can poke at it after, I think. Let's see. Where do we leave off? Who had a next question?
I think I was wondering with that edit experience you're looking at.
Yeah. So
is that a new page?
it goes back to the builder screen. So this screen right here, and it would have save or cancel. And I think that was, is this going to be a sticky thing? Because if they scroll down, through countless pages, which saw previously, that might be problematic, right? If you're just scrolling through this, you have to go all the way back to the top. I should investigate the, what does this look like?
I'm just picturing to that point of having to scroll through lots of stuff. I found something. I went to a role. I searched. I finally found it, right? And I need to change it. And now I got to go to the edit screen, and I got to repeat that process. Because I got.
We have the search field, but
right. So now you're talking about copy, paste, and search and free finding, right? You still got to do it. Yeah, we can make it easier, but I almost wonder if, like, how much we've looked at, do we need a edit and a view screen, or is the real problem we need to prevent accidental saving on the view screen? Because if we could solve that problem, then do we really need 2 views of this?
Mm-hmm. Well, so you wouldn't see, you could go to the edit and you would see all the thing, but until you did anything or made a change, it wouldn't save anything. It would just be like a click for a view until you made a change, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking like even on the view page, right? Like if the view page was the edit page, you could change things and it's not saved, and then maybe even like a save and like a listing of like you're changing these 3 roles or whatever might be a way to do it.
Yeah, I like that, because that basically like you would unlock the screen and you don't have to go to a new screen.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that's stuck in my head now. Like I finally found it. I looked for it, and now I got to find it again. Could be very
Yeah.
frustrating.
No, that makes sense. I think that the idea of the edit screen might make more sense as like an unlock screen. And that way it just keeps all the content in one page, and then they can just hit the one that you wanted to turn on and then save.
I do like the ability to jump between them though quickly, right? Like I don't think we want to get into this type of flow. So, you know, a drawer type of dual column kind of thing.
Yeah, I worked on something really similar to this for a platform fairly recently, and they ran into that where like, because what people were doing, they found was they were creating a bunch of roles that were like 99% identical. And so like literally they're sitting there like, okay, is it this role that has like one slightly different permission and the name that's almost the same, or the next one that my colleague created with basically the same name and a 2 next to it? And I'm like, yeah, having to go like back and forth trying to figure out like which of these is the one. Oh, this one only has 1 user and this one has 1,000 users. Like, yeah, you know, it's easy to create garbage in some of these, and then, you know, try to maintain that.
Yeah, this definitely on the branches pages, this manifests itself of, hey, I found the branch, and then like I want to create a branch from this branch, and our next thing is a drop down where you have to refine that branch, and users absolutely hate it. I do also want to say that we hopped over it, but I do want to say the words out loud that this table rows do not present themselves as clickable to me. And we use them everywhere in GitLab. So they would need some sort of visual treatment, I would think, to indicate that they are clickable.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that's something that needs to be updated or improved. I don't know if you have suggestions on that. I think the idea that Blair had about, at least in terms of the default, is like just have them as buttons or something at the top, was helpful for the 5 default roles, but for the list of custom roles, I think that might be problematic. Yeah, like since we're over time, I don't know if you all have to leave. Please feel free. If you want to continue, I'm happy to finish the dialogue and the agenda.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, great discussion. Thanks for everybody for chiming in. Thanks, Daniel, for presenting this and talking it through with all of us. Just an update on the first thing in the agenda. I did push the time 30 minutes later. So hopefully we'll be seeing Libor and a bit more. And yeah, feel free to keep chiming in on the agenda here for Daniel to sort of go over for this RBAC. I think it's super important. And yeah, thanks again, and happy Monday, everyone.
Sorry, I monopolized the meeting. I hope nobody else had anything to add to show.
No, this is very useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. Happy Monday.